Hey guys, Mr. B here. So today I've got this 2005 Saturn Vue with the 2.2 EchoTech, and it is throwing a code. The only code that it's throwing is P0068. That code is a map/math throttle position correlation code, somewhere along those lines. Basically what that code is for is the airflow going through the intake manifold. The calculated amount of air that's going through that manifold doesn't match up with what the computer thinks it should be. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys some of the steps that I've taken to diagnose this problem. I'm not going to lie, this one has stumped me for a while. I've flowed through the diagnostic chart from the service manual, and I did some tests to test the map sensor. I actually ended up replacing it because it wasn't an original sensor, heavily used sensor. That did not fix the problem. Look up the code in the service manual. It says to test the map sensor and the throttle body. Now, these electronic throttle bodies do go bad. You know, they don't last forever. It's literally just an electronic actuator that controls the throttle plate. So I threw one on there and it didn't change the problem. There's a lot of other things that I tested as well. I pulled out the spark plugs, and the spark plugs looked horrible. They were super black and sooty and nasty, and the gap was bad on them. So I put new spark plugs in because of course it's been misfiring. And the other thing I noticed too is that the fuel trims were really far negative. And I'll show you guys that on the scan tool. So I was testing fuel pressure. Fuel pressure wound up being around 56 or 58 at idle, which is very good. According to the manual, it shouldn't be anything below 50 or above 60. Anything above 60, and that could cause excessive fuel consumption and negative fuel trims and an engine that runs too rich, which it did seem like, oh, hey, this engine's running really rich. I could smell, you know, the fumes coming out the tailpipe. And so I thought, well, maybe there's a fuel issue. So I tested fuel pressure. Fuel pressure was good. So then I thought, well, maybe there was a leaky fuel injector. So there's literally just two bolts, one on this end and one on that end. And I pulled this all apart and got the air tube out of here, the intake air tube out of here. And I pulled this fuel rail up and I cycled the key on and off and tested to see if any of the fuel injectors would leak down at the bottom. None of the fuel injectors leaked. So we know that the fuel system is good, right? So I tested that. The fuel injectors seemed like they were working properly. I thought maybe one of them would be leaking, and it wasn't. I thought maybe the fuel pressure would be too high, and it wasn't. So the fuel system was fine. New map sensor, swapped out the throttle body, didn't fix the problem. You know, the other thing you want to look for too is the wiring on these. Make sure the connectors are all good. The map sensor is down below here, kind of behind the throttle body in this area, and the wiring on that all looks good, right? Comes over the computer here, right? Those connectors look good. All those wires look good. You know, I really looked over this to make sure that there weren't any issues with the wiring. And I also tested the map sensor reading on the scan tool, and I'll show you guys how to do that as well. But there's a lot of things that I did to this to try and figure out this one code before I finally found out that the catalytic converter was clogged. So what I did to test the catalytic converter is I went ahead and I disconnected the exhaust manifold bolts back here. So I have the exhaust manifold loose off of the engine, the back of the engine, the back of the cylinder head. This catalytic converter is unique. This situation is unique. I also unplugged the oxygen sensors. I could have also removed that oxygen sensor, but it didn't want to come loose and I didn't want to break it. I also didn't want to break the nuts on that manifold as well. So because I didn't know whether or not the catalytic converter was clogged yet, I figured I would just loosen up the bolts on the manifold, and those came loose no problem, and now it runs great. Of course, it's loud, but it runs really well. Most of the time when the catalytic converter clogs, the engine runs really quite well for, you know, usually about a minute to 5 minutes, and then it starts to bog down a little bit, and then it starts to run kind of rough and then eventually die. Okay, this car is unique in the fact that the moment that I start this, it just runs horrible. And I'll show you guys how it runs now with, and of course it's loud, but it runs quite well. I'm gonna rev it up. Okay, it revs up, it has a good throttle response. And I'm going to hook up a vacuum gauge and show you guys the vacuum reading. Okay, so sitting at idle, right now we're at about 23 inches of mercury for vacuum, which is a very good reading at idle. I'll show you guys what I was looking at on the scan tool to get to the point of figuring this out, that the catalytic converter is clogged. I also took out all the spark plugs, of course, replaced them and checked compression on all 4 cylinders. You know, if the engine can't actually draw in air and compress it to combust it, then that could cause an issue as well. Compression was at 160 on all 4 cylinders. Minimum is 100 on these 2.2 EchoTechs. So I knew the compression was good, which in theory tells me that timing is also good with the timing chain. If you run through all these tests and try and figure out what the problem is and you just can't quite pinpoint it, and the catalytic converter is not clogged and the fuel system's fine and the spark plugs are fine and you know, the throttle body and the map sensor are fine, take a look at your timing chains, because if it's off by just a tooth, that could cause issues as well. All right, so there's the map reading at 4.5 psi. That is not the actual vacuum reading. There's a way to convert that by doing some math. Basically, if you take the barometric pressure and then subtract, which in this case, in my area, is 14.75. So if you take that reading, it was 14.75 psi. So if I take that and subtract it by 4.2 psi, it'll be roughly 10.5 psi. And then if we convert the roughly 22 inches of mercury that we have on our vacuum gauge, we convert that to psi, it comes out to be roughly 10.5. So if we take the 14.75 psi of atmospheric pressure subtracted by the 4.2, it gets us 10.5, which is roughly what our vacuum reading is. So I know that the map sensor is working properly. I'm going to go ahead and rev it up and make sure it changes. And it does. Okay. The other thing that I looked at originally too was fuel trims. They were super negative, so I suspected an issue with the fuel system. Now that I've moved things around and kind of jostled that catalytic converter around, they're pretty normal, and I can actually rev it up quite a bit without any issues. So I'm kind of curious as to what's going on there. Obviously coolant temp is good. So there were a few things that I looked at before I determined that this vehicle is starting to have issues with the catalytic converter. It's also been burning a lot of oil, so that could be part of the reason why it's having issues as well. And I just noticed when I revved this up, it becomes a smoke show.